It was a quiet day in the control room of the Earth Space Research Center. The hum of the computers and the soft tapping of keyboards were the only sounds. Then, without warning, a sudden beep echoed through the room. The team of scientists and technicians looked up, surprised. They had been monitoring space for years, but this signal was different, stronger, clearer, and more powerful than anything they had ever encountered before. "Is this real?" Dr. Amelia Grant, the lead scientist, whispered in disbelief as she studied the screen. Her fingers quickly typed commands to analyze the source of the signal. It wasn't from any known planet, star, or civilization. It came from a remote part of the galaxy, far beyond Earth's reach. The signal was old, very old, but it was clear. Someone or something had sent it out long ago. The signal repeated every few minutes, a series of words in a language no one could understand. But there was something in the rhythm, something that told them it was important. Dr. Grant's team worked through the night, trying to decode the message. The symbols appeared to be a complex form of communication, unlike anything from Earth's history. As the team worked tirelessly, a breakthrough came. The message wasn't just random noises or static. It was a distress call. The words, though foreign, started to make sense. The message was a cry for help, sent by a long-lost alien civilization called the Khimar. Their planet, far from Earth, had vanished from all maps centuries ago. No one knew why or how. The team was stunned. The Khimar were a mysterious race in the galaxy's history. Some believed they had been wiped out by war. Others thought their disappearance was the result of a natural disaster. Yet here was their message, still traveling across the stars, still seeking help, even after so many years. "Should we even consider responding?" one of the technicians, David, asked. "This could be a trap, a dangerous game." Dr. Grant paused. She understood the risks, but something about this felt different. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her as a child. The Khimar were said to be a peaceful and advanced race, with technology far beyond Earth's. If their message was true, it could mean something incredible for humanity. It could be the key to unlocking new technology, new knowledge that could change everything. She turned to her team. "We can't ignore this. We have to send a response. We need to know what happened to them, and if they are still out there." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the risks, but the promise of discovering an ancient alien civilization was too great to pass up. With a few commands, Dr. Grant initiated a response, hoping that someone, anyone, would be out there to hear it. Back on Earth, a meeting was called. The Earth Council, made up of leaders from around the world, gathered to discuss the situation. The news spread quickly. A message had been received from the long-lost Khimar, and humanity had a chance to learn what happened to them. However, not everyone was excited. Some council members were skeptical. "It's dangerous to venture into unknown territory," argued General Marcus Steele, a military leader known for his caution. "This could be a trap. We don't know what we're dealing with." But others, like Captain Elias Hart, a decorated war hero and explorer, believed the opposite. "We have always been a species that explores, that pushes forward," he said. "This is our chance to help a lost civilization and learn from them. If they are still out there, we can make things right." The debate grew heated, with some pushing for a military response and others wanting to send a team of scientists. Finally, the council reached a decision. A small crew, led by Captain Hart, would be sent to investigate the Khimar's homeworld. It was a dangerous mission, but it was humanity's first real chance to uncover the secrets of an ancient civilization. Captain Hart was chosen for the mission. He had spent years exploring the farthest reaches of space, always returning with new knowledge. He was known for his quick thinking and bravery. But this mission would be different. The Khimar were not just a new world to explore. They were a mystery that had eluded the galaxy for centuries. And now, humanity had the chance to solve it. As Captain Hart prepared for the journey, he gathered his crew, a mix of scientists, engineers, and military officers. Each one had a different reason for accepting the mission. Some sought knowledge, others adventure, and some were driven by a sense of duty. Together, they would travel across the stars to the Kemar homeworld, hoping to find answers. The ship, the Odyssey, was ready to launch. Its sleek design and advanced technology were a testament to humanity's growing capabilities in space. As the countdown began, Captain Hart stood at the helm, looking out at the stars. He knew the dangers, but he also knew that this mission could change everything for humanity. "Ready to make history," he said, his voice steady. And with that, the Odyssey blasted off into the unknown, leaving Earth behind. No one knew what awaited them on the Kemar homeworld, but one thing was certain: humanity would not turn its back on a lost civilization, no matter the cost. After months of traveling through deep space, Captain Elias Hart and his crew finally arrived at the Kemar system. The journey had been long and full of uncertainty, but the crew felt a sense of anticipation as they approached the distant planet. The Kemar's homeworld, once a shining jewel in the galaxy, was now just a lonely speck in the vastness of space. The planet was eerily silent, with no signs of life or activity. "Captain, we've entered the Kemar system," said Lieutenant Sarah Miller, the ship's navigator, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. "The planet is ahead. No signs of any other ships or stations nearby." Captain Hart looked out through the window of the Odyssey, his eyes fixed on the planet ahead. The surface of the planet was a patchwork of green forests, vast oceans, and towering mountains. It was a beautiful sight, but there was something unsettling about it. The Kemar's once great cities were now reduced to ruins, forgotten by time. "Prepare for landing," Captain Hart ordered. "We don't know what we're walking into, so stay alert." The Odyssey began its descent, cutting through the thin atmosphere of the Kemar world. As they neared the surface, the crew could see the remnants of ancient structures below. Massive, crumbling towers and buildings that had once been filled with life. The ruins of the Kemar capital stood out, a shadow of its former glory. The city was a mix of elegant stonework and advanced technology, all now overgrown with vines and weathered by centuries of neglect. "This place, it's like a ghost town," said Dr. Amelia Grant, the lead scientist. She stood beside Captain Hart, looking out at the desolate city below. "The Kemar were clearly an advanced race, but there's no sign of any life. It's like they just vanished." "I don't like it," Sergeant Daniel Hayes, the ship's security officer, said. "There's no telling what happened here. We need to be careful." Despite the warnings, Captain Hart was determined. "We're here to find answers, and we're going to do just that. Stay focused." The ship touched down gently on the outskirts of the ruined city. The crew exited the Odyssey, stepping onto the cracked ground of the Kemar planet. The air was thin but breathable, and the temperature was cool, almost pleasant. Yet there was an eerie silence that surrounded them. The only sounds were the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees and the occasional creaking of the metal structures that had once supported the Kemar's advanced cities. "Let's set up a perimeter," Captain Hart instructed. "Dr. Grant, you and your team start scanning for any signs of the Kemar's technology. We need to know what happened here." As the crew began their work, the ruins seemed to stretch on forever. The Kemar's buildings were unlike anything Earth had ever seen, tall, elegant, and designed with strange, flowing shapes that seemed almost organic. Some structures still held glowing lights, though dim and flickering, as if they had been powered by some unknown energy source. It was clear the Kemar had mastered technology far beyond what humanity could imagine. "We found something," Dr. Grant called out as she approached a tall, broken tower. She knelt down beside a strange artifact half buried in the dirt. It was a small, glowing device, shaped like a crystal. As she picked it up, it hummed to life, casting a soft light. "This looks like it's from their central power system," Dr. Grant said, her eyes wide with excitement. "If this is what I think it is, this could provide us with the answers we need about the Kemar's technology." Captain Hart nodded. "Good work," Dr. Grant. Let's keep moving. As they ventured deeper into the city, the crew discovered more signs of the Khmer's once great civilization. Libraries filled with strange, unreadable texts, automated systems still running despite being thousands of years old, and more of the glowing artifacts scattered throughout the ruins. The further they explored, the more they realized how advanced the Khmer had been. Their technology was on another level, and it seemed to be tied to the very structure of the planet itself. But as the crew made their way to the heart of the city, something strange happened. A sudden shift in the atmosphere, an unnatural cold breeze, swept through the area. The ground trembled slightly, and the crew stopped in their tracks. It felt as though the planet itself was watching them, waiting. "Did you feel that?" Sergeant Hayes asked, his hand resting on his weapon. "I felt it too," Captain Hart replied, his voice low. "Stay sharp. There's something else here, something we're not seeing." The crew continued forward, their senses heightened. The further they walked, the more the ruins seemed to come alive with hidden energy. It was as though the Khmer had left behind more than just physical remnants. They had left behind a mystery, one that was waiting to be uncovered. Finally, they'd reached the center of the city. The massive structure before them was unlike anything they had seen so far. It was a grand circular building, its walls covered in intricate carvings and symbols. The energy around it was stronger than anything the crew had encountered. The building seemed to hum with life, as if it were still functioning despite the years of abandonment. Captain Hart stepped forward, his heart racing. "This is it. This is what we came here for." As they approached the building, a sudden voice echoed through their communication system. It was faint but clear, an ancient voice speaking in a language no one understood. The crew froze, their eyes wide with disbelief. The Khmer were gone, but their presence, their message, was still here. As the crew gathered around the ancient building, the strange voice continued to echo through their communication system, its words distant and hard to understand. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, as if the planet itself was waking up. Captain Hart stood at the front, his eyes focused on the mysterious structure before him. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on them all. The Khmer had once been a mighty civilization, but now they were nothing more than whispers in the stars. What had happened to them? Why had they disappeared? "Captain, look at this," Dr. Grant said, breaking the silence. She pointed to the carvings on the walls of the circular building. The symbols were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before, even with all the advanced technology they had at their disposal. They seemed to pulse with an energy that was both ancient and new, as though they were waiting for something. "We need to decipher this," Dr. Grant continued. "These symbols could hold the key to understanding what happened here." Captain Hart nodded. "Let's get to work. We don't have much time." The crew spread out, using their equipment to scan the building. They discovered more glowing devices, some buried under rubble, others still embedded in the walls. It was clear that the Khmer had once used these artifacts for something important. But what? The energy these devices gave off was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. It felt almost alive, as though the technology itself had a purpose beyond just powering the city. As the team worked, Lieutenant Miller found a strange panel on the floor. She carefully pried it open, revealing a hidden passage leading underground. A cold gust of air rushed up from the depths, making her shiver. The crew gathered around her, their faces filled with curiosity and apprehension. "Should we go down there?" Sergeant Hayes asked, his hand resting on his weapon. "This place is full of surprises." "We came here to find answers," Captain Hart replied. "We'll go together. Stay alert." With weapons in hand and lights illuminating the dark tunnel, the crew descended into the depths of the Khmer city. The walls of the tunnel were smooth, made of a material that shimmered like metal, but felt soft to the touch. It was clear that this was no ordinary passage. It had been designed for something, or someone, with a purpose. As they walked deeper into the tunnel, the temperature dropped and the air grew heavier. "What is this place?" Dr. Grant whispered, her voice echoing in the silence. I don't know, but we'll find out, Captain Hart said. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of urgency in his tone. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. Before them stood a massive door, taller than any structure they had seen on the surface. The door was made of the same shimmering material as the walls, and it was covered in more of the strange symbols they had seen earlier. At the center of the door was a glowing crystal, pulsing with light. Dr. Grant stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the crystal. "This is it," she said softly. "This is what we've been looking for." Captain Hart studied the door. He could sense that it was important, that behind it lay the answers they had come here for. But how to open it? The crew had no way of understanding the symbols or the crystal's purpose. For a moment, there was silence as they all stared at the door. Then, without warning, the crystal began to glow brighter. The symbols around it shifted, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. The door rumbled as if it was coming to life, and slowly it began to open. The crew stepped back in surprise, their weapons raised, ready for anything. The door opened with a low groan, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was bathed in an eerie blue light, and at the center of the chamber stood a massive structure, unlike anything the crew had ever seen. It was a machine, but it was more than just technology. It was a living, breathing entity. Tubes and wires connected it to the walls, and strange energy fields surrounded it, humming with power. "What is that?" Lieutenant Miller asked, her voice trembling with awe. "It's a core," Dr. Grant said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's the heart of their civilization. This is what powered everything: their cities, their technology, their way of life." Captain Hart's mind raced. If this is what powered their civilization, then why was it abandoned? Why didn't they take it with them? As they moved closer, the crew noticed something else, an inscription on the wall next to the core. It was written in the same strange symbols. But this time, there was something different. The symbols seemed to be glowing, almost alive. Dr. Grant carefully approached the wall, her hand hovering over the inscription. "This could be it," she said. "This could be the reason the Khmer vanished." Without warning, the inscription began to shift, just like the symbols on the door. The glowing words rearranged themselves, and in a language that was now understandable, a message appeared. "We are the Khmer. Our time has ended. Our world has fallen. The core is the key. Use it wisely, for it holds the future of all." The crew stared in disbelief. The Khmer had known their civilization was ending, and they had left behind a warning, a message for anyone who could find it. Captain Hart felt a chill run down his spine. The Khmer didn't just disappear, they were forced to leave. But why? The mystery deepened, and the crew knew that their journey had only just begun. The core, the heart of the Khmer's power, held the answers they sought. But with those answers came an immense responsibility. The future of not only the Khmer, but of humanity as well, was now in their hands. The crew stood in awe as the glowing inscription faded from the walls of the Khmer chamber. The air around them felt heavy with the weight of the message. Captain Hart could feel the tension building inside him, the uncertainty of what lay ahead pressing on his shoulders. The Khmer had left behind a warning, but what was the key they had mentioned? And more importantly, what would happen if they used it? "This is bigger than we thought," Lieutenant Miller said, breaking the silence. She was staring at the core, the massive machine that seemed to hum with life. If this is what powered their entire civilization, then we're dealing with something far beyond anything humanity has ever seen. Dr. Grant nodded. She had been studying the symbols and the technology for hours, and even with her expertise, she was still struggling to understand the full extent of what they had uncovered. "It's a system, not just a power source," she explained. "This core is connected to every part of the Khmer world. Cities, machines, even their biology. It's like they integrated their entire society with this energy field." Captain Hart paced in front of the core. "And it's still running. The Khmer may have disappeared, but this machine is alive, waiting for something." He turned to Dr. Grant. What does it mean when they say it holds the future of all? Before she could answer, Sergeant Hayes spoke up, his voice filled with concern. Do you think this could be dangerous? What if it's meant to destroy, not to help? The crew exchanged uneasy glances. There was a risk in exploring the unknown, especially when dealing with something so powerful. But they had come this far, and turning back now was not an option. We don't know enough to make that call, Captain Hart replied. But we have to find out. Dr. Grant stepped closer to the core, her fingers lightly grazing the shimmering surface. The energy around her seemed to pulse, almost as if the machine could sense her touch. She closed her eyes, focusing on the faint hum that echoed in her mind. There was something calling to her, a sense of purpose, of destiny. I think I can communicate with it, she said softly. It's waiting for me to understand it. The crew exchanged looks of surprise. Could Dr. Grant really connect with the Khmer technology? We'll stay here, Captain Hart said. You do what you need to do, but be careful. Dr. Grant nodded. She closed her eyes again and reached out with her mind. For a moment, nothing happened. But then she felt a connection, a thread of energy that linked her to the core. The symbols around the chamber glowed brighter, swirling in patterns that made her heart race. She understood, at least part of it. The Khmer had been using the core to evolve, to merge their physical bodies with the technology, creating a civilization that was part machine, part organic. The more Dr. Grant focused, the clearer the images became. She saw visions of the Khmer people, once vibrant and thriving, but slowly growing weaker as they relied more and more on the core. They had merged with the energy, but it came at a cost. They had lost their ability to reproduce naturally. Their biology had been altered in ways they didn't fully understand. The Khmer had become dependent on the core for survival. Then, Dr. Grant saw something darker. A sudden surge of power, a failure in the core's system, causing widespread devastation. The energy that had once sustained them turned into something uncontrollable, and the Khmer civilization collapsed. Their world became a barren wasteland, and those who survived had to abandon everything they knew. Dr. Grant gasped, pulling her hand back from the core. Her mind reeled from the flood of images, the history of the Khmer flashing before her eyes. What happened? Captain Hart asked, rushing to her side. What did you see? Dr. Grant was still recovering from the shock, but she managed to speak. The Khmer, they didn't just disappear. They tried to evolve beyond their biology. They merged with the core, but it became unstable. The core's energy turned against them. Captain Hart's face darkened. And the key they mentioned. Dr. Grant looked at the core, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. It's still here. The core is still working, but it's incomplete. It needs something, someone, to restore balance. Without it, the energy will continue to grow unstable. The same thing that destroyed the Khmer could happen again. But this time, to us. Is there a way to fix it? Lieutenant Miller asked, her voice tense. Dr. Grant's fingers trembled as she touched the core once more. I think I can stabilize it, but it's risky. It's going to require something from all of us. Captain Hart was silent for a moment, considering their options. They had uncovered the truth behind the fall of the Khmer, but that didn't solve their problem. If they couldn't restore the balance of the core, humanity could face the same fate as the Khmer. If we fail, he said quietly, we could destroy everything. We won't fail, Dr. Grant replied firmly. We have to believe that there's a way. I can feel it. The core is waiting for us. The crew gathered around her, their faces filled with determination. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. They would face the unknown, and they would do it together. The hum of the core echoed through the chamber, its vibrations resonating deep in the bones of the crew. They stood in a tight circle around Dr. Grant, who was still trying to gather her thoughts after the flood of images from the core. Her fingers still tingled from the touch, and a quiet fear settled over her. The truth she had uncovered was far more complicated than she had imagined. Captain Hart studied her carefully, his brow furrowed. "So what now? You said the Corps needs something from us. What does it want?" Dr. Grant shook her head, her mind still racing. "I don't know yet, but there's one thing I'm certain of. The Corps isn't just a power source. It's alive in a way we don't understand. It's waiting for something, or someone." Lieutenant Miller stepped closer, her eyes searching Dr. Grant's face for any sign of reassurance. "Are you saying we have to merge with it, like the Khimar did?" Dr. Grant hesitated. The idea seemed impossible, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. "Maybe, but I don't think we'll be merging in the same way the Khimar did. They gave up their humanity for power. But I believe we can use the Corps to restore balance without losing who we are." Captain Hart crossed his arms. "And if we fail?" Dr. Grant's gaze flickered to the Corps, a quiet fear creeping into her chest. "Then everything we know, our world, our people, could be lost. The Corps is a force that can either save or destroy. It's that powerful." Sergeant Hayes stood back, his arms crossed, clearly skeptical. "So we're supposed to trust this thing? After everything we've seen? That's a dangerous gamble." "We don't have a choice," Hart replied firmly. "We came here to find answers, and now we have them. We can't turn our backs on it now. Not when the fate of humanity might rest on our next move." Dr. Grant stepped closer to the Corps, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the energy pulsing from it, as though it recognized her presence. It was as if the machine was calling to her, urging her to make a decision. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. "I have to try," she said quietly. "If we don't do this, the Khimar's fate will be ours." The crew fell silent, each member lost in their thoughts. They had come to this alien world seeking answers, and now they stood on the edge of something much bigger. The Khimar had failed to control the Corps, and they had paid the price. The question now was whether humanity could do better, or if they would follow the same tragic path. As Dr. Grant extended her hand toward the Corps, a sudden surge of energy shot through the room. The air crackled with power, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The crew stumbled back in alarm, unsure of what was happening. The Corps was reacting, but how? "Get back!" Captain Hart shouted, grabbing Dr. Grant by the arm and pulling her away from the machine. "Something's wrong." The Corps' hum grew louder, its glow intensifying. Dr. Grant's heart raced. She could feel the power rising, like a storm building to a climax. But this time, it felt different. It was no longer just a dangerous force. It was reaching out to her. She could hear it, calling to her in a language she didn't fully understand but felt deep inside her. "Don't pull me away," she whispered. "I have to finish this. It's speaking to me." Captain Hart looked uncertain, but he knew better than to stop her. He had seen the determination in her eyes before, and he knew that once she made up her mind, there was no turning back. "Do it fast, Dr. Grant," he said. "We don't know how much time we have." With a deep breath, Dr. Grant stepped forward again, her fingers brushing against the surface of the Corps. The energy surged once more, and she could feel it pulsing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. The world around her seemed to blur, and she was no longer in the chamber with the crew. She was somewhere else, somewhere vast and timeless. She saw visions of the Khimar, their ancient cities in ruins, their people scattered. She saw their final moments, the ones that had led to their downfall. And then, in a flash of light, she saw a future. Not a future of destruction, but a future of hope. A future where the Corps could be controlled, its power harnessed for good. A future where humanity could thrive, not as slaves to the machine, but as masters of their destiny. Dr. Grant's mind snapped back to the present, and she gasped for air. The Corps had shown her a path forward, but it was unclear and dangerous. There were no guarantees. "I know what we need to do," she said, her voice steady but full of urgency. "We have to channel the Corps' power, direct it where we want it to go. But we'll need all of us. We'll need to combine our strengths, our minds, and our will to make this work. The crew exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation sinking in. They had been given a chance, a slim chance, but it was still a chance. "We're in this together," Captain Hart said, his voice firm. "We'll make it work," Lieutenant Miller added. Dr. Grant looked at the crew, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Then let's do it. Together." The crew gathered around, ready to face the unknown. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they had one final shot at saving everything. The crew stood in a circle around the core, their faces set with determination. Dr. Grant had just revealed what she had seen. The vision of the future. A future where humanity controlled the core, where they could harness its power and use it for good. But there was no time to waste. They were running out of options, and the future of humanity rested on what happened next. Dr. Grant glanced at her crew, all of them bracing themselves for what was to come. Captain Hart, standing tall as ever, gave her a quick nod of approval. His trust in her had only grown since they landed on this alien world, and he was ready to follow her lead to the end. "You're sure about this?" Hart asked, his voice low and steady. Dr. Grant swallowed hard, knowing that what she was about to say could change everything. "I'm sure. This is the only way forward." There was a moment of silence, the hum of the core almost deafening in the quiet. Then Lieutenant Miller spoke, her voice soft but filled with concern. "What if we fail? What if the core doesn't let us control it?" "We have to try," Dr. Grant replied, her voice unwavering. "The Kmar failed because they didn't understand the core's true nature. They treated it as just a machine. But it's alive. It thinks, it feels. And now, it's calling to us. If we trust it, if we show it we can work with it, we can unlock its potential." Sergeant Hayes, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "But can we really trust it? After all we've seen, I'm not sure I'm ready to put my faith in this thing." "I understand your hesitation," Dr. Grant said gently. "But think about it. If we don't try, if we leave this place without unlocking the core's power, we risk losing everything. The Kmar are gone because they couldn't control it. We're humanity's last hope. We can't afford to give up now." Captain Hart took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing on him. He looked at the core, then back at Dr. Grant. "I trust you. We're with you. Let's do this." The crew exchanged looks of agreement. No one knew exactly what they were about to face, but they all understood the importance of this moment. The fate of humanity, perhaps even the entire galaxy, was in their hands. It was all or nothing now. Dr. Grant approached the core again, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch it. This time, the core's energy felt different. There was no overwhelming surge of power, no shock or tremor. Instead, it felt calm, almost like a welcoming embrace. It was as if the core was waiting for them, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. "Everyone, get ready," Dr. Grant said, her voice steady, but filled with urgency. "We need to work together. Focus on the core, focus on the energy. We have to merge our minds, our strength, and our will. Only then will we be able to control it." The crew gathered around her, hands raised toward the core. They formed a circle, each of them focusing on the energy radiating from the center of the room. The power was growing stronger, a force they could feel but couldn't see. It was as though the core was alive, breathing with them, pulsing in rhythm with their hearts. Dr. Grant closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and focused all her thoughts on the core. She thought about the vision she had seen, the future she wanted to create. She thought about the lives they could save, the worlds they could protect. She felt the energy of the crew, their determination, their trust. It was a force greater than anything she had ever experienced before. Slowly, the core began to respond. Its glow intensified, the hum growing louder and louder. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the energy in the room built to a fever pitch. The crew held their ground, focusing all their strength on maintaining the connection. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the room fell silent. The glow of the core dimmed, and the vibrations ceased. Dr. Grant opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if they had succeeded, but something had changed. The air felt different, lighter, as if the world had shifted in some small but meaningful way. Captain Hart stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "Did we do it?" Dr. Grant took a step back from the core, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what had happened, but she could feel it. The core was no longer just an alien power source. It had become something more, something that was now in their control. "We did it," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "The core is ours now. We can use it. We have the power to save humanity." The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, the tension lifting from their shoulders. They had done it. They had unlocked the core's power, and now they had the means to protect their people. But as Dr. Grant looked at the core, she couldn't help but wonder, what else was it capable of? They had only just begun to understand its potential. And with that thought, she knew their journey was far from over. The sun had risen over the alien world, casting a golden glow over the landscape. The crew stood on the edge of the vast plateau, gazing out at the horizon. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the weight of the past had been lifted. They had succeeded. Humanity had unlocked the power of the core, and with it, a new era had begun. Dr. Grant felt a sense of calm settle over her. It had been a long journey, one filled with uncertainty and danger. But now, standing here with her crew, she knew it had all been worth it. They had saved humanity from the brink of destruction. They had proven that they were capable of more than just survival. They had shown the galaxy that humanity could rise above its limitations and face the unknown with courage and strength. Captain Hart stood beside her, his arms crossed as he surveyed the landscape. "I never thought we'd make it this far," he said quietly. "But we did." Dr. Grant nodded, her gaze fixed on the core in the distance. It was still there, still pulsing with energy. But now it felt like a part of them. They had learned to understand it, to work with it. It no longer felt like an alien force to be feared, but a tool to be used for the greater good. "We have a responsibility now," Dr. Grant said, her voice steady. "The core's power could change everything. We can use it to protect Earth, to heal the damage we've done, and to explore the stars. But we have to be careful. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." "We won't," Captain Hart replied. "We've seen the damage it can cause in the wrong hands. The Kimar learned that lesson the hard way. But now, it's our turn to make sure it doesn't happen again." Dr. Grant turned to face him, her expression serious. "We can't do this alone. The galaxy is a big place, and there are still threats out there. We need allies, and we need to make sure everyone understands that we're not just going to use the core for ourselves. This is for all of us, for humanity, and for every civilization that's been left behind." Captain Hart nodded in agreement. "We'll make sure they understand. But first, we need to get back home. Earth needs to know that we've succeeded. We need to show them that humanity is ready to take its place among the stars." The journey back to the ship was quiet, each crew member lost in their own thoughts. They had come so far, and now the hardest part was behind them. But there was still much work to be done. The future of humanity was no longer just a dream. It was a reality, and it was up to them to shape it. As they boarded the ship and prepared for takeoff, Dr. Grant looked back one last time at the alien world. It had been their home for so long, and now they were leaving it behind. But she knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. "Set course for Earth," Captain Hart commanded. The ship hummed to life as it lifted off the ground, leaving the alien world behind. Dr. Grant stood by the window, watching as the planet grew smaller and smaller in the distance. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a sense of wonder. There was so much more to explore, so many more mysteries to uncover. And with the core's power at their disposal, There was no limit to what humanity could achieve. The ship flew through the vast expanse of space, the stars twinkling in the distance. Dr. Grant couldn't help but smile. She had always dreamed of this moment, of being part of something bigger than herself. And now, she was living it. "We did it," Lieutenant Miller said, breaking the silence. "We really did it." "Yeah," Sergeant Hayes added with a grin. "And the galaxy better watch out." Everyone laughed, the tension of the past few days melting away. They had done what no one had believed was possible. They had unlocked the power of the core, and in doing so, they had secured the future of humanity. But as Dr. Grant looked out at the stars, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, new threats to face, and new mysteries to uncover. But with the crew by her side, and the power of the core to guide them, she was ready for whatever came next. "We've only just begun," she whispered to herself, her heart filled with hope. The future was waiting, and humanity was ready to take its place among the stars.